the Justice for Bridget Scanlon campaign is going to organise an event at 12:30 on Wednesday the 14th at the gates of Leinster House, Kildare Street. We will have published a short leaflet explaining the miscarriage for justice which exists, and we will have distributed that to TDs. So we're trying to canvass them. One or two of them have been vocal on the issue of Tusla and other miscarriages which have taken place and are taking place. We want to enlist them to demand, number one, that Bridget be released, but secondly, to demand that Tusla be abolished and an inquiry be put in place about their conduct over the last, since their foundation. A few of us here, and I know some family are here as well, were present during lots of the court cases that Bridget was dragged through. And I have no hesitation whatsoever in saying hers is a miscarriage of justice. At the trial in Kilkenny, which condemned her to imprisonment here, everything about it was wrong. In the first instance, it was declared in camera, one of these secret courts, so that everyone was gagged, nobody was allowed to talk about it. In fact, I believe even appeals to higher courts needs the permission of the judge involved in order that we can speak about it. But from word go, the judge displayed that he had a mission. He was going to imprison Bridget. In fact, the state prosecutor, on the morning of that trial, the state prosecutor was in Carlow town in front of people whom he knew to be friends with Bridget, and he laughed and sneered, saying that they were going to imprison people today. He knew in advance what he was going to do, and they did it. During the trial, at which Bridget had no legal representation, she had a Mackenzie friend. Even that facility was abused by the judge. One day, the Mackenzie friend was told, go to the back of the room, move around. All their interaction was interfered with. But why did Bridget not have representation? I heard her in other courtrooms saying, because she doesn't trust them. And I agree with her, they are not trustworthy. In fact, in Bridget's case, her legal counsel she had previously forced her in vulnerable circumstances to put a plea of guilty in one of her cases, which she regretted doing because she was innocent. But they relied that Bridget had been given some particular bad news on a morning, and right on the spot they entered a guilty plea and would not allow it to be changed. She was misrepresented by legal professionals paid for by public money. So she has no faith in them. For years she's had no faith in them. Since Bridget was a young girl, she has told us herself on video, since she was 14 on the streets of Dublin, the then health authorities were paying her money just to dismiss her and leave her on the streets. That was the social and family care that was given to Bridget Scanlon. Since then, she has received continuous abuse. Her children have been abused, taken into care wrongly, and while in care, abused. Her grandchildren have been abused. We saw dramatic video coverage at one point, on a Christmas week, I think. Armed detectives with shotguns prancing up the stairway of Bridget's house. Why? To seize two young children, for which there was no legal basis for doing so. This is what our state is doing to defenceless families. And when it gets to a courtroom, everybody is gagged. You're not allowed to say what happened. During Bridget's trial, the case where she was convicted of threatening to kill a particular social worker, there was no evidence of it, just someone's word. It took that individual 6 months before they made an official complaint. 6 months about such a serious charge which has a woman imprisoned. It took 6 months to make the complaint. And of course the same staff neglected even to carry out Tusla standing operating instructions, which would be to write an incident report. There was no incident reports written. Why? There was Gardaí investigations after the time. The social worker, the principal senior social worker who was threatened, made statements. The person who allegedly heard the threat made statements, and there was differences between them. When Bridget called witnesses, two of them who had direct experience to explain the entire context of Bridget's experience with Tusla, they were shut up halfway through giving their testimony. And in fact, because one of them had dared to say something which would have blackened the character, according to the judge, which would have taken away the good name of a diligent, long-serving public servant, a social worker, because she dared to suggest offering that evidence in the court of law, which was in camera, in secret, she was dismissed. And then, before the jury was dismissed, to balance the record, the state insisted, and the judge accepted, that we cannot have the good name of any social work taken. That would be unheard of. And the jury were told, you must consider nothing other than that these social workers are of the highest professional and moral standard available. If that wasn't biasing the jury, I don't know what was, because those were the people who were the subject of the complaint. And if that wasn't enough, the judge then proceeded, completely against normal legal practice, to read out prior convictions, which most of which have been concocted anyway, but reading out prior convictions so as to tell the jury, you're dealing with a real live criminal here, and we will hear nothing said against the social workers. So in other words, the judge told the jury, this is what you have to do, nothing else will go. Bridget was ready and had done her best in very emotional circumstances, without professional legal help, without degrees coming down her arm, to explain her life and her case. She had a prepared statement ready, but she couldn't give it because emotion kicked in. She wasn't able to explain it. She cried. And these judges and these overpaid barristers and the overpaid social workers and all the teams of experts they brought with them, they didn't care. Here was a vulnerable woman in state care, essentially, since she was a very young girl. If that is not a vulnerable individual, I don't know what is a vulnerable individual. You cannot pass sentence in a court and say it's fair, a sentence in a secret court without professional legal help for the person accused, and give them sentence of jail. That is a travesty of justice. It is a mockery. It is a miscarriage of justice. But it's done in our name. In our name, in the name of the state which we are supposed to own, for which our own ancestors, many of them had their lives taken in a fight for freedom. This is our state, and this was done in our name, and it's wrong. And just as we're outside Mountjoy here, people will have passed down the road and seen the murals. Very nice memorials painted to heroic women in our past who were imprisoned here in their day. I see Miriam McSweeney from Cork, who was a senior leader of Cumann na mBan. She would not preside over what's happening in the Tusla courts today. She would not agree that Tusla can go into a court in the morning without telling anybody and get an order to take possession, to take into care the children of a family who don't even know they're being discussed in the courtroom and who are not even accused of any crime. How can you be not accused of a crime, let alone found guilty, and have your children taken from you? But this is happening again and again and again in Ireland, and it has to stop. This is why Bridget is in jail, because after her life experience, for a time when I got to know her and some others, she stood up and said, this is wrong, it's rotten, it's corrupt. They're abusing children. We've all heard and we've seen the inquiries and the great debates in Dáil Éireann and on television about the mother and baby homes, about the laundries. I think what is happening today at the hands of Tusla is every bit as damaging, is every bit as abusive of the most vulnerable children in our society and of the most vulnerable families, because it is the families who cannot speak, who cannot afford the big money for paying top legal people to fight for them. These are the ones who suffer, and coincidentally, beside all of that abuse, there's money making. The foster care business is big money, the guardian ad litem is big money, the social workers, they're all cleaning it off. The legal profession, solicitors, barristers, the more frequently you appear in court for mention, the better, because they're cashing it in each time. There's a lot to be said about Bridget Scanlon and the countless other families. Every family affected should stand up and tell their story, because it is the weight of all those stories that will change things. I hope tomorrow week, outside Leinster House, that some of the TDs who are duty bound to represent the people, I hope that some of them will take on board that duty and stand up for Bridget Scanlon and stand up for justice. Join us next Wednesday the 14th at 12:30 outside Leinster House. Cormagiv.